What would you do if you caught your husband cheating while fighting to save a patient from a wrongful death sentence? I'm Amina, a 24-year-old nurse in Fairview, Pennsylvania, and that's the nightmare I lived through starting in November 2024. My husband, Fareed, betrayed me with a coworker. While I battled to clear Khalid, a patient facing execution for a crime he didn't commit, a forbidden bond grew between us, exposing a shocking web of lies. Watch this true infidelity story to see if justice and love can survive such betrayal. There are moments in life that hit you like a tidal wave, pulling you under, leaving you gasping for air, wondering how you'll ever resurface. I am Amina, a 24-year-old nurse in Fairview, Pennsylvania. I thought I knew what it meant to face the unexpected, until a single night in the dead of winter turned my world upside down. It was November 2024, and I was a small-town girl, raised in a tight-knit Muslim American community, working at Fairview General Hospital, where I poured my heart into caring for patients. I had a husband, Fareed, who I thought loved me as fiercely as I loved him. A life I believed was built on trust. But in the span of a few hours, I discovered a betrayal so deep, it would challenge everything I thought I knew about justice, love, and redemption. It was the early dawn hours of a frigid winter morning in Fairview, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, makes the air bite at your skin. I was on the overnight shift at the hospital, my first year as a nurse, but already I'd earned a reputation. Compassionate, disciplined, someone the staff and patients could rely on. I was finishing up some paperwork when the hospital radio crackled to life, an urgent message cutting through the silence. "Amina, we've got a critical case in Willow Creek," the dispatcher's voice said, tense and hurried. A rural community about 20 miles out. A 21-year-old man, Khalid Mansour, is accused of poisoning his mother. She's deceased, and he's showing signs of ingesting the same toxin. "We need you there now." My heart dropped, a chill running down my spine. Nothing to do with the weather. Without hesitation, I grabbed my medical bag, threw on my coat, climbed into the hospital's transport vehicle, the frost-covered windshield barely thawing as the engine roared to life. The air was thick with ice. I whispered a quiet prayer under my breath, asking for strength as I drove into the darkness. Willow Creek was a small, isolated community, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's secrets. Or so I thought. When I arrived, the scene was like something out of a nightmare. A middle-aged woman lay lifeless on the dirt floor of a modest cabin, her body cold and still, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Beside her sat a pale, weak young man, Khalid, his eyes downcast, his hands trembling. He cradled a small wooden container filled with crushed herbs. He didn't resist or speak when I approached, his silence eerie against the chaos of the moment. "Put that down and let me help you," I said gently, my voice steady despite the horror unfolding in front of me. Khalid obeyed without a word, dropping the container to the floor. I knelt beside him, checking his vitals. His pulse was weak, his skin clammy, his breathing shallow. I started treatment on site, administering what I could to stabilize him, then rushed him back to Fairview General. The hospital lights a stark contrast to the darkness we'd left behind. For hours, Khalid remained in medical isolation, hooked up to monitors as I worked to flush the toxin from his system. He didn't offer an explanation, didn't plead his case, just stared at the ceiling, his face a mask of resignation. The news came swiftly, delivered by the local authorities. After a quick review of the evidence, The elders of Khaled's village in Willow Creek condemned him for matricide, a crime punishable by death in their traditional court. But in accordance with their customs, Khaled was granted a 2-month period of reflection, a time for final prayers, repentance, and last wishes. He was transferred back to my care at Fairview General, placed in a sparse room stripped of electronics, monitors, even curtains. Just a small window letting in a sliver of light. Each day, I checked his vitals, brought him meals, waited for the toxicology results. My mind racing with questions. Who was this young man, and what had driven him to such a horrific act? Or had he even done it at all? There was something about his silence, his calm acceptance. It didn't sit right with me. I'd seen guilty patients before, the way they'd lash out or beg for mercy. But Khaled was different. He seemed broken, not guilty. And then there was Fareed, my husband. He'd been acting strange lately, distant, secretive, always on his phone. I pushed the thought aside, telling myself I was just stressed, that my marriage was fine. But deep down, I knew something was wrong, something bigger than I could yet see. As I stood by Khaled's bedside, watching him stare out that small window, I couldn't shake the feeling that this case and my life was about to unravel in ways I never could have imagined. Every day I walked into Khaled's room at Fairview General, I felt the weight of his silence pressing down on me, a heavy reminder of the mystery I couldn't shake. I'm Amina, a 24-year-old nurse in Fairview, Pennsylvania. What started as a routine emergency call in November 2024 had spiraled into something I never could have prepared for. Khaled Mansour, a 21-year-old patient accused of poisoning his mother, was now under my care, sentenced to death by the traditional court of his village in Willow Creek. But the more I watched him, the more I doubted his guilt, and the more my own life began to unravel in ways I couldn't have imagined. It was December 2024, and Khaled's room felt colder than the winter outside, a stark, isolated space stripped of anything that might offer comfort. No electronics, no monitors, not even curtains to soften the harsh fluorescent lights. Just a small window letting in a sliver of gray morning light. A cruel reminder of the world he'd been cut off from. Each day, I'd check his vitals, bring him meals, wait for the toxicology results, my mind racing with questions. He barely spoke, his eyes fixed on that tiny window, his face a mask of resignation, but there was something in his stillness, a quiet dignity that didn't fit the profile of a murderer. I'd seen killers before, patients who lash out, beg, or manipulate, but Khaled was different. He wasn't fighting for his life, he was waiting to lose it. That broke my heart in a way I couldn't explain. I tried to focus on my work, to keep my emotions in check, but every interaction with Khaled left me more unsettled. One afternoon, I brought him a cup of herbal tea to help with his lingering nausea, deciding to break the silence that hung between us like a fog. "You have 2 months," I said softly, setting the cup on the small table beside his bed. "If you have any last wish, it's tradition to honor it." I'd expected him to ask for something simple, a letter to a loved one, a favorite meal, a prayer. But what he said next stopped me cold. Khaled looked up at me, his dark eyes unreadable. "I want to spend my remaining nights with a healer," he said, his voice low, "a woman who's never known a man." I froze, my breath catching in my throat, the weight of his words crashing over me like a wave. My first instinct was to snap at him, to tell him how inappropriate, how outrageous his request was. but I held myself back, swallowing the lump in my throat. "That's not a normal request," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "No woman can be forced to do that." Khalid's gaze didn't waver, his tone calm but piercing. "Then why not you?" he asked, his voice devoid of malice, almost vulnerable. "You're unmarried?" I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I wasn't unmarried. I had Fareed, my husband of 3 years, a doctor at this very hospital. But Khalid didn't know that, and his assumption stung in a way I couldn't explain. I shook my head, my voice sharper now. "I can't," I said, turning to leave, my heart pounding in my chest. But as I walked away, his words echoed in my mind like a haunting refrain. Why not you? That night, I tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep, the question gnawing at me. Was it a selfish request, born of desperation? Or was there deeper loneliness hiding beneath it? And why did it make me feel so seen, in a way I hadn't felt in years? The next morning, I arrived at the hospital exhausted, my mind still reeling from Khalid's request. I tried to focus on my rounds, but my thoughts kept drifting back to him and to Fareed. My husband had been acting strange for weeks, distant, secretive, always on his phone, brushing off my attempts to connect. I told myself it was just stress. Fareed was a cardiologist, always busy. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. That afternoon, as I was charting in the nurse's station, I overheard a conversation that shattered what little peace I had left. Two of my coworkers, Sarah and Jenna, were whispering near the break room, their voices low but audible. "Did you see Fareed with Melissa again?" Sarah said, her tone dripping with gossip. "They were in the on-call room during lunch. Looks real cozy." Jenna giggled, her voice sharp with malice. "I'm not surprised. Fareed's been all over her for months." Poor Amina. She has no idea. My heart stopped, the clipboard slipping from my hands, clattering to the floor. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, the air sucked out of my lungs as their words sank in. Fareed, my Fareed, was cheating on me? With Melissa, a surgical resident I'd worked with for years? Someone I'd considered a friend? I stumbled back to my station, my hands trembling, trying to process the betrayal. I wanted to confront him, to scream at him, but I couldn't. Not yet. I had Khalid to think about, a patient who needed me, a man who might be innocent despite the world's judgment. But the pain of Fareed's infidelity burned like acid in my chest. I knew I couldn't ignore it for long. That evening, I brought Khalid his dinner. Sitting down beside him, my emotions a tangled mess. I needed to focus on him, on his case, but my mind kept drifting to Fareed, to the life I thought we'd built together. "Why did you ask for that?" I said suddenly, my voice quieter than I'd intended. "That wish, it's not right." Khalid looked at me, his eyes softer now, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through his stoic mask. "I didn't mean to offend you," he said, his voice low. "I've been alone my whole life, Amina. I've never known love, never felt seen. I thought, if I'm going to die, maybe I could feel that just once. And you've been the only one who's looked at me like I'm still human." His words hit me like a punch, stirring a mix of pity and guilt I couldn't shake. I wanted to help him, to fight for him, But I couldn't give him what he'd asked for, not like that. "I'm sorry, Khalid," I said, my voice trembling. I can't be that for you, but I can be here. I can listen." He nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. For the first time, I saw a spark of hope in his eyes. "That's more than I deserve," he whispered. As I left his room, my mind was a storm of emotions. Khalid's request, Fareed's betrayal, the weight of a wrongful conviction I couldn't ignore. I knew I had to dig deeper into Khalid's case to find the truth before it was too late. But I also knew I couldn't ignore the cracks in my marriage any longer. Fareed's infidelity was a wound that wouldn't heal on its own. As I walked through the hospital corridors, I felt a fire ignite inside me. A fire for justice, for truth, and for the redemption I so desperately needed. The hospital corridors at Fairview General felt colder than ever, each step echoing with the weight of secrets I couldn't ignore. I'm Amina, a 24-year-old nurse in Fairview, Pennsylvania. What I thought was just another patient case had spiraled into a nightmare, one that tore at the very fabric of my life. Khalid Mansour, a 21-year-old accused of poisoning his mother, had become more than just a case under my care. He'd become a lifeline, a forbidden connection, one that gave me hope amidst the wreckage of my own shattered marriage. It was January 2025, and my husband, Fareed, had been cheating on me with Melissa, a surgical resident at the hospital, a betrayal I'd uncovered just last month. But as I dug deeper into Khalid's case, I stumbled into a web of lies, a web that tied Fareed's infidelity to a conspiracy I never could have imagined. Khalid's request back in December had left me reeling, his words echoing in my mind like a haunting refrain. "Why not you?" I couldn't give him what he'd asked for. I was married, even if that marriage was crumbling. But I couldn't shake the connection I felt to him, the way his vulnerability mirrored my own. Every time I walked into his sparse room at Fairview General, stripped of all comfort except a small window letting in slivers of light, I saw a man who'd been abandoned by the world, a man who might be innocent despite the damning verdict against him. I'd sit by his bedside, checking his vitals, bringing him meals, trying to coax him into talking, but he remained a mystery, silent, stoic, his dark eyes fixed on that window, like he was waiting for death to come. But I wasn't ready to let him go, not when my gut screamed that something was terribly wrong. The toxicology report finally came back, and I pored over it late one night. In the nurse's station, the hospital eerily quiet, except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. The herbs found in Khalid's possession, the ones that supposedly killed his mother, they weren't native to Willow Creek or anywhere in the region. They were rare, potent, traced back to a controversial herbalist named Victor Hensley, a man with a shady reputation in Fairview. Victor had been reported multiple times for selling unregulated, often dangerous concoctions, but he always seemed to slip through the cracks, rumors of bribes and intimidation keeping him untouchable. My instincts sharpened as I read the report. Could Khalid have been framed? The herbs didn't add up, and neither did his silence. I needed to know more. I started asking questions, quietly at first, speaking to villagers in Willow Creek during my off hours, pretending to check on community health needs. Most were hesitant, their eyes darting nervously as they spoke in hushed tones. But slowly, pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. An elderly neighbor of Khalid's mother, Mrs. Fatima, pulled me aside one evening, her frail hands trembling as she whispered, "I saw men near their house that night, Victor's boys. They forced the door open. There was shouting. Khalid wasn't even there at the time." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I asked, "Why didn't you speak up?" My heart pounding. She looked down, her voice barely audible. "I was too afraid. Victor, he has people who will do his dirty work." Her testimony was a bombshell, but it wasn't enough, not yet. I called in a favor from a friend at a nearby clinic, asking for discreet background checks on Victor's recent activity. At the same time, I dug deeper into the hospital records, looking for anything that might connect to Khalid's case. That's when I stumbled onto something that made my blood run cold. Fareed, my husband, had been on duty the night Khalid was admitted, something he'd never mentioned. And Melissa, the woman he was cheating with, had handled the initial toxicology screening, a screening that conveniently pointed straight to Khalid. My hands shook as I pieced it together. Fareed and Melissa weren't just having an affair, they were involved in framing Khalid. But why? I confronted Fareed that night in our small apartment in Fairview, my voice trembling with rage as I held up the hospital records. "What the hell is this, Fareed?" I demanded, shoving the papers into his chest. "You were on duty when Khalid was admitted, and Melissa handled the tox screening. Did you two set him up? Is that why you've been sneaking around with her?" Fareed's face went pale, his eyes darting away as he stammered, "Amina, you're overreacting. It's not what you think." But I cut him off, my voice rising with fury. "Don't lie to me. I heard the nurses talking. You've been with Melissa for months, and now I find out you're involved in framing an innocent man? Who are you, Fareed? What happened to the man I married?" He stepped back, his jaw tight, but the guilt in his eyes was unmistakable. "You don't understand," he snapped, his voice cold now, devoid of the warmth I'd once loved. "Victor paid us to make sure Khalid took the fall. His mother was causing trouble, filing complaints against Victor for his shady herbal deals. She had to go, and Khalid was the perfect scapegoat. Melissa and I, we needed the money, Amina. You wouldn't get it." My stomach churned, disgust and betrayal crashing over me like a tidal wave. "You needed the money?" I shouted, tears streaming down my face. "You sold out an innocent man for blood money while you were screwing around behind my back? You're a monster, Fareed." I stormed out, my heart pounding as I drove back to the hospital, my mind racing with the horrifying truth. Fareed and Melissa had framed Khalid to protect Victor, all while Fareed betrayed me with an affair. But as I sat in the hospital parking lot, gripping the steering wheel, I realized something else. My connection to Khalid was growing, a forbidden bond born of shared pain and a desperate need for justice. That night, I went to his room, my voice soft but firm. "I believe you, Khalid," I said, my eyes meeting his. "You didn't kill your mother, and I'm going to fight for you, no matter what it costs me." His gaze softened, a flicker of hope breaking through his stoic mask. In that moment, I knew I'd crossed the line I couldn't uncross. I was risking everything, my marriage, my career, my place in this community. But I couldn't turn back now. The truth was out there, and I was going to find it. The air in Fairview General felt heavier than ever. Each breath I took laced with the bitter taste of betrayal and the burning need for justice. I'm Amina, a 24-year-old nurse in Fairview, Pennsylvania. The past few months had turned my life into a battlefield. Khalid Mansour, a 21-year-old patient wrongfully sentenced to death for his mother's murder, had become more than just a case. He'd become a forbidden connection that gave me hope amidst the wreckage of my own shattered marriage. My husband, Fareed, had been cheating on me with Melissa, a surgical resident at the hospital. And I uncovered a chilling truth in January 2025. They were part of a conspiracy to frame Khalid, all to protect a shady herbalist named Victor Hensley. Now in February 2025, with the evidence in my hands and a fire in my heart, I was ready to expose their lies in a courtroom showdown, one that would change everything. But the cost of that fight would shock me to my core. I'd spent days gathering every piece of evidence I could, working late into the night, my eyes burning from lack of sleep, piecing together the puzzle. Mrs. Fatima's testimony about Victor's men breaking into Khalid's mother's house, the toxicology report linking the poison to Victor's rare herbs, the hospital records showing Fareed and Melissa's involvement. It was all there, a damning paper trail that could overturn Khalid's conviction. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. Victor had influence, the kind of power that kept people silent. And the traditional court in Willow Creek wasn't known for second chances, especially not when a young woman like me dared to challenge their verdict. Still, I couldn't back down. Not for Khalid, not for the truth, and not for myself. The day of the public hearing arrived. A cold gray morning in Fairview that mirrored the storm inside me. The Willow Creek Community Center was a modest building. Wooden benches, a small dais packed with people. Elders, villagers, hospital staff, and curious onlookers filled the room, their whispers buzzing like a swarm of bees. I stood at the front, my hands trembling as I clutched my files, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me. Khalid was brought in wearing a plain white shirt, his face pale, but his posture steady. A quiet strength in his eyes I hadn't seen before. He glanced at me, a flicker of gratitude passing between us. In that moment, I knew I was doing the right thing, no matter what it cost me. The council chair, Imam Darwish, began the proceedings. A stern man with a gray beard and piercing eyes, his voice booming through the room. Nurse Amina Qadri has submitted a request for review, he said, his tone heavy with skepticism, of a case we closed by majority votes. Today, she presents evidence suggesting an alternate explanation for the death of Sister Layla Mansour. The accused, her son Khalid, has already been declared guilty. But we must honor truth, even if it arrives late. I took a deep breath, stepping forward, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. Imam Darwish, council members, I said, my words cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. I'm here to prove Khalid Mansour is innocent. The poison that killed Layla Mansour came from a rare herb not found in this region. It was traced to Victor Hensley, a known herbalist with a history of selling dangerous, unregulated concoctions. I handed over the toxicology report, my hands steady. Layla Mansour filed a complaint against Victor 2 weeks before her death, accusing him of distributing toxic herbs to young girls with fertility issues. She was a threat to his operation. And on the night she died, Mrs. Fatima, her neighbor, saw Victor's men break into her house. Khalid wasn't even there at the time. I played Mrs. Fatima's recorded testimony, her frail voice echoing through the room, detailing the shouting, the forced entry, the fear that had kept her silent for so long. The crowd shifted uneasily, whispers turning to gasps. I laid out the hospital records next. These documents show that Fareed Qadri, my husband, and Melissa Carter, a surgical resident, were on duty the night Khalid was admitted, Melissa handled the initial toxicology screening, which conveniently pointed to Khalid. But the herbs didn't match the initial report. Fareed and Melissa were paid by Victor to ensure Khalid took the fall. The room erupted, shouts of disbelief and anger filling the air. All eyes turned to Fareed and Melissa, who sat in the back, their faces pale with shock. Imam Darwish raised a hand, silencing the crowd, his gaze sharp as he turned to me. "These are serious accusations, Nurse Qadri," he said, his voice like steel. "Do you have proof of this conspiracy?" I nodded, handing over the bank records. Records I'd obtained through a discreet contact at the clinic, showing payments from Victor to Fareed and Melissa, totaling $10,000 in the weeks leading up to Lila's death. "This is the proof," I said, my voice trembling with fury. "My own husband betrayed me, betrayed this community, betrayed justice to protect a criminal." Fareed stood, his face red with anger, his voice shaking as he pointed at me. "She's lying," he shouted, his eyes wild. "This is a personal vendetta. Amina's just bitter because I found someone else. She's trying to ruin me." The crowd gasped, and I felt like I'd been slapped, the sting of his words cutting deeper than I thought possible. But I held my ground, my voice steady as I turned to him, tears burning in my eyes. "Found someone else?" I said, my voice breaking with rage. "Do you mean Melissa, the woman you've been sleeping with for months? The woman you conspired with to frame an innocent man? Don't you dare pretend this is about me, Fareed. You sold your soul for money and you dragged me down with you." The crowd erupted again, shouts of shame and traitor echoing through the room. Imam Darwish called for order, his gaze piercing as he turned to Victor, who sat stone-faced at the side, his arms crossed, his eyes cold as ice. "Mr. Hensley," Imam Darwish said, his voice like steel, "do you deny these herbs came from your supply?" Victor didn't speak, his silence louder than any confession. The murmurs grew into a roar. Mrs. Fatima stood, her frail frame trembling, but her voice firm. "I saw them," she cried, pointing at Victor. "Victor's boys went into Layla's house that night. Khalid wasn't there. They told me I'd lose everything if I spoke, but I can't live with this lie anymore." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging like a thundercloud. Imam Darwish leaned forward, his gaze piercing as he turned to Khalid. "Then why did you remain silent, Khalid?" he asked, his voice softer now, searching. "Why did you let the world believe you were guilty?" Khalid stood slowly, walking to the front, his voice steady for the first time in public. "I didn't confess," he said, his words ringing with quiet strength. "I stayed silent because I knew no one would believe me. My mother raised me to protect her dignity. She told me if anything happened, I must never let the world think she was weak. I thought if I died, at least the whispers would stop. I didn't expect anyone to fight for me." He turned to me, his eyes locking with mine. My heart clenched at the raw gratitude in his gaze. "I was wrong," he whispered. The council recessed for deliberation, but I barely heard the murmurs around me. My eyes met Fareed's across the room. The hatred in his gaze sent a shiver down my spine. I'd exposed him, humiliated him in front of the community he'd worked so hard to impress. I knew he'd never forgive me. But as I looked at Khalid, standing taller than I'd ever seen him, I knew I'd made the right choice. The truth was out, but the battle was far from over. And the forbidden bond between me and Khalid had just taken a dangerous turn. The courtroom in Willow Creek fell silent after Khalid's exoneration. But the echoes of that day reverberated through my life like a shockwave, leaving everything I'd known in ruins. I'm Amina, a 24-year-old nurse in Fairview, Pennsylvania. In fighting to save Khalid Mansour, a man wrongfully sentenced to death for his mother's murder, I'd uncovered a betrayal so vile it tore my world apart. My husband, Fareed, had been cheating on me with Melissa, a surgical resident at Fairview General. And worse, they'd conspired with a corrupt herbalist named Victor Hensley to frame Khalid, all to cover up their own crimes. The truth had set Khalid free in February 2025, but it had also shattered my marriage, my career, and my place in the community. What came next in March 2025 would test me in ways I never thought possible. As the council announced Khalid's release, the room erupted into chaos. Gasps of disbelief, shouts of outrage, murmurs of awe at the injustice that had been undone. Victor was arrested on the spot. His operation shut down. Authorities descended on him like a storm. Fareed and Melissa were dragged out in handcuffs, their faces pale with shock, their careers and reputations in tatters. "Amina, you'll pay for this," Fareed screamed as he was led away, his voice dripping with venom, his eyes burning with the hatred I'd never seen before. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, the reality of what I'd done sinking in. I'd exposed my own husband, humiliated him in front of the entire community. There was no going back. The fallout was swift and brutal. Fareed and Melissa were charged with fraud, tampering with evidence, and accessory to murder. Their medical licenses revoked. The hospital launched an internal investigation. Fairview General became a media circus overnight. Reporters swarmed the entrance, their cameras flashing, shouting questions about the scandal. "Nurse Amina, how does it feel to expose your own husband?" one yelled, shoving a microphone in my face as I tried to leave after a grueling shift. I pushed past them, my hands trembling, the weight of their words crushing me. The community I'd once called home turned on me. Some praised me as a hero for saving Khalid, but others whispered behind my back, calling me a traitor for betraying Fareed, for airing our dirty laundry in public. "She should have stayed quiet," I overheard a villager say at the local market, her voice sharp with judgment. "What kind of wife does that to her husband?" I couldn't stay in Fairview any longer. The hospital, the town, the memories of Fareed's betrayal, they were suffocating me. I filed for divorce the day after the hearing, my hands steady as I signed the papers, but my heart breaking with every stroke of the pen. Fareed didn't fight it. He was too busy facing criminal charges. But he sent me a scathing letter from jail, his words cutting deeper than any knife. "You ruined my life, Amina," he wrote, his handwriting jagged with rage. "You chose that murderer over your own husband. You'll regret this." I tore the letter to pieces, tears streaming down my face. But his words lingered, a cruel reminder of the love I'd lost, the life I thought we'd built together. I packed up my things and moved to a small apartment in Easton, a quiet town an hour away from Fairview, where no one knew my name or my story. I needed a fresh start, a place to heal. But the scars of Fareed's infidelity and the community's judgment followed me like a shadow. I took a leave of absence from nursing, unable to face the hospital environment that had once been my sanctuary, now tainted by memories of betrayal. But even as I tried to rebuild, I couldn't stop thinking about Khalid, his quiet strength, the way he'd looked at me in that courtroom, the bond we'd forged through shared pain. Khalid came to find me a month later, in April 2025, his presence at my door a shock that sent my heart racing. He looked different, healthier, his dark eyes brighter, a tentative smile on his lips as he stood on my doorstep, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. "I didn't know where else to go," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I wanted to thank you, Amina, for believing in me when no one else did." I stepped aside, letting him in, my emotions a tangled mess as I took in the man I'd fought so hard to save. Over coffee, he told me how he'd started volunteering at a clinic in Willow Creek, helping patients the way I'd helped him, trying to find his place in a world that had once condemned him. "I don't know how to live anymore," he admitted, his voice breaking, "but I want to try, for you." His words hit me like a lightning bolt, stirring feelings I tried to bury, feelings that had grown in the quiet moments we'd shared during his darkest days. I reached for his hand, my fingers trembling as I met his gaze. "I'm trying to find my way to Khalid," I whispered, tears brimming in my eyes. "Fareed, he broke me. But you reminded me what it means to fight for something real." In that moment, the forbidden bond we'd forged became something more, a fragile hope, a chance at redemption for two broken souls. That night, I sat at my small desk with a journal open in front of me. I wrote about the pain, the betrayal, the fight I'd won. I closed my eyes, a memory flickering to life, a summer day in 2023. Fareed and I laughing at a park in Fairview, the sun warm on our faces. We'd been so happy then, or so I thought. I was in love, I thought, a bittersweet ache in my chest. But that love had been a lie. "Can I ever forgive them?" I whispered, my voice trembling as I stared at the journal. I wrote the answer in careful letters. Not yet. But as I looked across the room at Khalid, sitting quietly with a cup of coffee, I knew I'd found something worth fighting for. A new chapter was beginning, and I was ready to write it. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of my small apartment in Easton, Pennsylvania, casting a warm, golden glow over the modest space I'd come to call home. It was May 2025, and I stood in the kitchen, a cup of coffee in my hands, the scent of fresh brew mixing with the spring air drifting through the open window. I'm Amina, a 24-year-old nurse who'd once thought my life in Fairview was unbreakable, until it shattered under the weight of betrayal, justice, and a forbidden bond. One that changed everything. Fareed, my husband, had cheated on me with Melissa, a co-worker at Fairview General. Starting back in November 2024, their betrayal a wildfire that burned through everything I held dear. They'd framed Khalid Mansour, a patient wrongfully sentenced to death for his mother's murder, working with a corrupt herbalist, Victor Hensley, to cover their tracks. I'd fought to clear Khalid's name, exposing their conspiracy in a courtroom showdown in February 2025, a battle that left my marriage and my old life in ruins. But from those ashes, I found something I never expected, a quiet, healing love and a new purpose. 2 months had passed since that fateful hearing in Willow Creek. The scars of Fareed's betrayal still lingered, a dull ache that flared up on quiet nights. The divorce had been finalized quickly. Fareed didn't fight it, too busy facing prison time for fraud and accessory to murder. He and Melissa were sentenced to 10 years, their medical careers destroyed, their names synonymous with scandal in Fairview. Victor got a life sentence, his empire of dangerous concoctions dismantled. The hospital underwent a major overhaul with new policies to prevent such corruption. But I couldn't go back, not after everything. I'd left Fairview behind, seeking solace in Easton, where the whispers of judgment couldn't reach me. Khalid became my anchor in those early fragile months. He'd moved to Easton too, unable to stay in Willow Creek, where memories of his mother's death haunted him. We didn't rush to define what we were. Our bonds had been forged in the crucible of shared pain, not fairy tale romance. But over time, that bond grew into something deeper, something real. We'd sit on my tiny balcony, sipping tea as the sun set, talking about everything and nothing. His dreams of becoming a clinical care worker, my plans to return to nursing on my own terms. "You saved me, Amina," he'd said one evening, his voice soft, his hand brushing mine. "Not just my life, but my soul." I smiled, my heart swelling with the warmth I hadn't felt in years. "I saved you too, Khalid," I whispered, knowing it was true. Fareed had broken me, but Khalid had reminded me what it meant to fight, to love, to heal. We got married in a small, private ceremony at a mosque in Easton, just a handful of new friends and my sister, who'd stood by me through it all. There were no grand gestures, no lavish celebrations, just two people choosing to build a future from the wreckage of their pasts. Khalid started taking courses in clinical care, determined to help others the way I'd helped him, while I began conducting workshops for nurses, teaching them to look beyond symptoms and listen to the stories behind the patients. Together, we found a quiet redemption, a love born not from fairy tales, but from truth, sacrifice, and second chances. Looking back, I wonder if I could have seen Fareed's betrayal sooner. The late nights, the whispered phone calls, the way he'd pulled away. But then I look at Khalid, at the life we're building, and I know I wouldn't change a thing. Did Fareed, Melissa, and Victor ever face the full karma they deserved? I'd like to think so. Sometimes I imagine them in their cells, haunted by the lives they destroyed, and I hope it stings. Thanks for watching this true infidelity story, y'all. It's been a wild ride, and there's much more to come. I turn to the camera, my eyes steady, my voice soft but firm. If you've ever faced the betrayal that turned your life upside down, you're not alone. Subscribe to Yanyo's cheating stories for more jaw-dropping Reddit stories. They'll keep you hooked. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been betrayed like this? I'd love to hear your stories. Hit that bell so you don't miss what's next. I'll see you soon. Stay tuned for more secrets, more betrayals, and karma coming to settle the score.